I'll now invite Dr. Alisi back to the stage for an update from a regional perspective. Thank you.
Good morning. How are we this morning? Good. Before I start my presentation, I've been hearing the triple wins being reiterated from up here a few times yesterday and today. And really that is the rationale for the promotion of labor mobility since its inception, and especially from the Pacific side, that labor mobility will generate wins for workers, for the countries that they're from, and for the countries that they go into to work in. I think yesterday we heard from the minister that we can confirm that RSE is delivering a win for the labor receiving country here in New Zealand. It's delivering a win for workers. We've heard from the presentation earlier this morning, workers are earning an income. But the win for the labor sending countries, or the countries that the workers are from, is a bit more complicated and sometimes uncertain. But yet the Pacific countries are very much of the belief that labor mobility can really have a development benefit, a development impact for them. And this was the rationale behind the move from the Pacific to include labor mobility in the PACER Plus. And for those of you who are not familiar with PACER Plus is a free trade agreement between the Pacific Island countries and Australia and New Zealand. And we have, through the negotiations, an arrangement on labor mobility, which is a regional framework for labor mobility. And our work is predominantly on looking at that win for the labor sending countries, the countries of the Pacific. And I really appreciate the topic of my session is to look at moving from policy to practice, because this is a real problem in the Pacific. We have, under PACER Plus, through funding from New Zealand and Australia, supported the development of a lot of policies, a lot of strategies, which I believe is collecting dust somewhere in some of the ministries. And so in my work in PACER Plus, I manage trade and services, investment, and labor mobility. We look at the interconnection between trade and labor mobility, and really looking at how we can leverage labor mobility and harness labor mobility to support economic development in the Pacific countries. And so instead of, whilst we're doing policies and strategies, I also like to do pilots to kind of inform policy and to also already get some tangible runs on the board. And one of the pilots that I want to share with you today is an exciting pilot that we're currently running, looking at leveraging labor mobility to support supply chains, export supply chains in the Pacific, with pilots in Vanuatu and Solomon Islands focusing on the cocoa industry. So really understanding how do we transfer, how do we generate development gains or the win for the Pacific labor sending countries. Our understanding of the migration, we have to understand the migration development nexus. And so these development benefits are transferred through these 4 key mediums. One, through employment, which you are graciously providing for our workers who are mostly underemployed, some of them unemployed, some of them are leaving employment to participate in the schemes. It's also through the financial capital. This is through the remittances that they send back home or the savings that workers take back with them at the end of their employment. And then also we look at human capital. This is where skills come in. And so really skills, in addition to remittances, is what the Pacific is looking at as a main gain out of labor mobility schemes. And also social capital. We understand that when workers are here, they can establish networks that can contribute to potentially trade and investment opportunities. I like to focus on skills development because, and I'm grateful that I follow the presentation earlier, because this is something that the Pacific is really looking into, and it was reiterated yesterday in our Pacific Island Forum. What we are hearing from the countries is that the private sector is complaining about the loss of labor, which is affecting supply chains, it's affecting local private sector development, because we're not just losing people who are unemployed, but we're also losing employable people who are currently or have been employed. And so what the Pacific are looking into in terms of their gains from the Pacific, from the RSE and labor mobility schemes, is how can we leverage labor mobility to increase the skilled workforce in the Pacific, to develop skills that are needed and relevant to support development in the Pacific? How can we increase the employability of our labor mobility workers coming into New Zealand as well as to Australia? And also looking at how we can leverage skills to support household income diversification and sustainable livelihoods. Now, the issue is that, and this is not just an issue with labor mobility, this is predominantly an issue within the national labor markets and skills training infrastructure in the Pacific. The loss of labor and skill shortages is not just due to temporary labor mobility, it's also permanent migration, but there is evidence that there are labor and skill shortages affecting private sector development. There's a misalignment between supply and the training that's currently being provided, especially through TVET institutions, and the skills needs of private sector. And there's a lack of skills recognition, especially of workers coming back from labor mobility who are wanting to engage in employment in their home countries. There's also limited information on how workers can invest or reinvest into the local private sector, and there's limited stakeholder cooperation. I understand in this room we predominantly have employers, LSUs, but when we're looking at development benefits, the ecosystem far exceeds the stakeholders, especially when it comes to the labor sending countries. It's not just the LSUs. We have to look at the whole economic development ecosystem. And so this is where we have introduced these pilots in the cocoa industry in Vanuatu and Solomon Islands. And this really speaks to the essence of reintegration. Focusing on the cocoa industry. And these are new pilots that we have just started in Vanuatu and Solomon Islands, and we're really keen to look at how they transpire going forward. And you might question why cocoa. So cocoa is one of the top 3 agricultural exports for both Vanuatu and Solomon Islands. They are premium niche markets, and they also have contributed to inclusive growth because they're largely smallholder farming. The challenge that we are currently facing as we're learning from the pilots is that the local production in both Solomon Islands and Vanuatu is on a decline, mainly because of declining farm productivity, and this is because the trees are getting old. There hasn't been any focus or investment in systematic replanting. Because it's mostly smallholder farming, there's limited skills, and also the loss of labor, according to the private sector there, is affecting the supply chain. And so what we are doing through this pilot is really primarily in terms of its objective is to boost the value and the volume of cocoa production and cocoa exports in Solomon Islands and Vanuatu through strengthening the supply chain, reinvestment by workers and their households into the local supply chain and industry, and also looking at opportunities for skills training and financial inclusion. So I'd like to touch on just the key components. When we're talking skills development, these 3 elements need to happen in order to effectively have a benefit or a positive impact on the supply chain and the industry in the Pacific. What we understand is that there's a lot of training happening. There's a lot of training happening at pre-departure. There's a lot of training happening while they're working here in Australia and New Zealand. And there's training also when they return. But a lot of these training are not aligned to the skills needs or the supply chain skill gaps in the Pacific. And a lot of these skills are not recognized either here in New Zealand or even in the Pacific. And so what we are trying to do through this pilot is to look at, firstly, identifying what are the priority skills needs in the supply chain for cocoa in Vanuatu and Solomon Islands. What we have identified, the 3 top priority skills needs are grafting, pruning, and health and safety. We have talked to the LSUs, and it seems like this could be matched to needs of employers in RSE and in the PALM scheme in Australia as well, even though it might not be cocoa, but there might be similar skills needs. And so there is an opportunity to match and perhaps align training to cater for both the skills needs in the sending country as well as here in New Zealand. And the skills training design. We're looking at a skills training program that covers the worker journey from pre-departure, during their work here in New Zealand, and also on return. And how can we prepare workers effectively so that they are employable when they come into New Zealand through the work-ready training. So the idea is that we have a work-ready pool that is actually work-ready. And so when they come here, they already have the basic skills that you would need, and especially these skills, if that is relevant for your companies. And then in designing these skills training, we are taking into consideration also the skills recognition. So I was really excited about the presentation yesterday on skills recognition, because we're working in the Pacific with local TVETs on how we can facilitate this skills training so that workers who come back are able to find employment if they wish to find local employment, and actually to be effectively remunerated in accordance to their skills. Investment component. So the issue with investment, and I've heard that, we shouldn't be pushing entrepreneurship or investment because this might not be feasible. We, in our consultations with the workers and through my own research, is that a lot of workers are keen, especially those who have gone on the programs for more than 3 or 4 years. They're interested in investing, they're interested in entrepreneurship. They just don't know how, and they don't know what opportunities there are for investment. And so our approach to investment here is to identify what are the potential investment opportunities that workers and their households could potentially invest in the supply chain for cocoa. So what we have identified through our current work, there are opportunities for investment in nursery and grafting enterprises. There's opportunities for investment in logistics, looking at local value add, and also looking at opportunities for just the maintenance and replanting. And so what we're doing, we're going to package this into simple business plans and then provide them to the workers so that they understand what the business idea is, how they can start a business, and then link them to existing business support services in the Pacific, including access to finance, so that they can actually start a business and support the growth of their business. Stakeholder coordination is a key constraint, and this is a key component that's covered under the pilot. We're hoping that we can also include employers. We're setting up a committee in both Vanuatu and Solomon Islands that is not just limited to the LSUs. LSUs are a key part of this committee, but it also includes the employers, it includes the business development support services, it includes the TVETs, the qualification authorities. These are the key stakeholders that are needed to get this pilot working. And we're hoping that interested employers would also be part of this committee so we can get a design and a model that can work and we can potentially replicate across different supply chains and products. And so through this, what we want to see, we anticipate that we can realize the triple wins. For workers, they can acquire new skills, they can increase their employability rate, and they can also have opportunities for sustainable livelihood. For the local cocoa industry in Solomon Islands and Vanuatu, labor shortages would be addressed, skill shortages will be reduced, and there would be a potential increased production and export from these countries. And then we hope that the RSE employers would also have the opportunity that you have access to more skilled workers, that when they come, they're actually work ready, and therefore supporting your businesses. And you will also have the opportunity to effectively contribute to the development of countries, especially these priority industries in the Pacific. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Alisi. Are there any questions from the floor, please?
Thank you very much, Dr. Alisi. That's a very interesting and exciting initiative that you've done in the Pacific. I'm wondering if there's also a possibility to extend that in future to coconut replanting, because Kiribati, for example, that's one of the main source of income, and we are also experiencing that trees are getting old and the workers are coming abroad. They don't have time to do the replanting. So yeah, just a matter of question.
Yeah, like I said, this is a pilot. We're working, this is very much private sector led from the Pacific end. So we're working with the key export industries in key export businesses in Solomon Islands and Vanuatu. If this model is tested and it's found to be working, we could replicate to the coconut copra industry as well.
Any other questions? None? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Alisi.
Thank you.